Vince had lived his whole life with one story echoing in his mind. It was a story his grandfather told him when he was just a boy. The old man, a veteran of the Second World War, rarely spoke about the war. But when he did, his voice would drop to a near whisper. He described a winter in Germany, when their unit stumbled upon an abandoned Nazi outpost amid the ruins of a burned-out city. Among the rusted weapons and charred papers, they discovered a sealed crate of archives. Most of it was propaganda, but one folder stood out. Maps of the Himalayas, marked with German notations and strange symbols, mentioning something called the Lost Amulet of Power. His grandfather had never gone after it. He always said some things were better left alone. But for Vince, a seeker of relics, it sounded like a challenge thrown across time. He built a career chasing legends, and this one could be the greatest of them all. Decades later, armed with copies of those fragile maps, Vince stood in the shadow of the Himalayas, ready to risk everything. He gathered a small team in a dusty town at the foot of the mountains. There was Tenzin, a wiry guide who spoke little and weighed every step with quiet precision. 3 more locals joined them, hardened men seasoned by the perils of the high peaks. But even they exchanged uneasy glances when Vince unrolled the Nazi schematics of the cave. Their ascent started under a clear sky. Snowfields glittered like glass, and the peaks looked almost holy. But after the second day, the weather shifted without warning. Winds howled like voices, the path seemed to rearrange itself, and once, Vince woke to find their camp scattered with strange prints in the snow, like something had circled them in the night, dragging something heavy. On the 4th day, one of the porters refused to take another step. "The mountain has awakened," he said. "It's a sign. We must leave while we still can." Without another word, he turned and began the long descent back toward the town. The rest of the group pressed on without him. Inside the mapped valley, the air felt heavier, thinner, as if they were trespassing somewhere meant to stay untouched. Shadows seemed thicker. Sometimes they heard rocks clattering above, but saw nothing. Once, Vince thought he saw a figure standing far off, perfectly still on a ridge, watching. The cave was exactly where the map said it would be, hidden behind a frozen waterfall. They hacked their way through ice until a black mouth yawned open before them, breathing cold air that smelled faintly of metal and something older, like burnt stone. Inside, their lights cut across walls marked with symbols, spirals, jagged lines, and crude depictions of figures bowing before something small but radiant. The deeper they went, the colder it became, the sound of dripping water echoing like a clock counting down. Finally, at the very heart of the mountain, they found it. The chamber was small but sacred. A rough altar stood in the center, carved from dark rock, and on it sat an object no bigger than a fist, a pendant of dull metal etched with concentric rings. It looked unremarkable, almost disappointing. Yet Vince's chest tightened. There was weight in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. "This is it," he whispered, reaching out. Tenzin grabbed his wrist. "You felt it too, didn't you? Believe me, this is no joke. Leave it where it lies," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to get out." But Vince's curiosity had turned to hunger. He took the amulet. The moment his fingers closed around it, the mountain seemed to sigh, a deep, almost living sound. A tremor rolled through the stone beneath their feet. Far above, something cracked like a rifle shot. "Time to go," Tenzin said sharply. Outside, the world had changed. The mountains had vanished into a suffocating fog, snow lashed at their faces, and the wind howled like some ancient beast. The trail was gone. They moved blindly, yet it felt as if the mountain itself was pushing them back. Slowly, sanity began to erode. 2 days blurred into a haze of survival and creeping madness. Strange sounds whispered through the storm, and visions, wild, fevered, came to them both waking and in uneasy dreams. Fear sank its claws into each mind, relentless and cold. On the third night, a sound pulled Vince from his restless sleep. Tenzin was gone. His pack lay open, abandoned, and a set of footprints led off into the darkness. No one followed. There was no point. By the next day, the earth itself seemed to groan. A sheet of ice split open with a sharp crack, swallowing one of the porters into the void. Another swore he heard a beautiful song riding the wind, a melody so haunting that, entranced, he stepped calmly off a rocky ledge, vanishing into the abyss before Vince's horrified eyes. By the 5th day, Vince was alone. The storm didn't stop. Food ran out. He kept the amulet in his pocket, though sometimes he swore it felt warm, as if it pulsed faintly against his thigh. The map was useless. Landmarks vanished, replaced by shifting white walls. When he stumbled upon a sheer cliff, dizzy and half-frozen, he thought he saw something below, a faint light, like a lantern, moving through the storm. Voices followed, distant but clear. They spoke a language Vince didn't know, but the rhythm was almost familiar. Then came the avalanche, a roar like the world tearing apart. Vince had only a second to look up, to see the mountain folding in on itself before the snow swallowed everything. Weeks later, the rescue teams found only scattered belongings half buried in the snow. There were no bodies, no tracks, and no amulet. Somewhere high in the mountains, far from that cursed cave, the amulet still lay entombed beneath tons of ice and stone, a pendant cold and dim, its carved rings worn smooth by centuries. It had left its sanctuary, and no one could say what ancient curses it carried. Perhaps the disasters, the tragedies, the senseless horrors you read about in the news might never have happened if Vince had heeded his grandfather's warning. But the world is what it is. No one will ever know. And sometimes, in those silent peaks, climbers swear they've seen a lone figure standing against the wind, something glinting faintly on his chest. If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.